Hi, so my senior symposium is going to be on the importance of evolution and phenotypic plasticity, and my name is Tracy Harrell. So to kind of get things started here, my table of contents, I really want to run through my introduction, my research question, and then I want to move into what is evolution and phenotypic plasticity, why evolution and phenotypic plasticity matter, the negatives and the downfalls that can come with these natural things, the possible inadvertent genetic changes that can occur when evolution and phenotypic plasticity take place, and the solution that I think would work best in addressing these possible inadvertent changes. So, my research question is, where might the line be drawn between detrimental and beneficial phenotypic plasticity in evolution in wild organisms? So I really wanted to take a scientific approach to this matter. I wanted to really focus on how it occurs in the wild, why it occurs, and how people have slowly started to affect it. And it's more so an exponential growth in human affection of phenotypic plasticity and evolution as people are slowly feeling the need to learn more and more about the genetic makeup and the adaptations that animals can go through. So, really, to introduce things on what is evolution and phenotypic plasticity. Evolution is the systematic filtering by natural selection of randomly occurring changes in DNA. But what this kind of means is that evolution occurs for a purpose. So whether it's a genetic mutation, whether something is affecting an organism, evolution and phenotypic plasticity, which is one of the lead-ins to evolution, may occur. So just to kind of keep things moving, adaptive alleles are an allele that has functional effects on a phenotypic trait that can produce an increase in fitness. So again, this is really similar to what evolution is, that an organism will have an allele that adapts, the organism will change, and this change could be for good or for bad, but the most important thing is that the organism felt a need to change. So they were exposed to something, and now a change must occur. So I feel as though the best way to introduce this is through the English peppered moth and the Industrial Revolution. So during the Industrial Revolution, it's outlined in both my article on urban evolution and Dark Satanic Wings. The Industrial Revolution polluted the atmosphere from burning coal, and all of this soot would gather in the air and cause the sky to appear more gray. The sky is a lot darker than it normally is. Instead of a clear blue sky, especially above a big city, a hub like London, the sky would be a lot darker. So the English peppered moth adapted to that, which is a very common way of explaining evolution, but it was simply through natural selection, as English peppered moths were predominantly white with black spots, but those white moths were now being easily spotted in the air by their predators, such as small birds. So these white moths are flying through the air and they're easily spotted in the dark, grayish brown atmosphere of soot. So in order to evolve, natural selection occurs, adaptive alleles trigger within some English peppered moths, and the genetic offspring of these animals are often, they appear darker. So instead of the majority of English peppered moths being white with a few dark spots, the majority of English peppered moths between 1760 and 1840, when the Industrial Revolution was raging on, especially in London, the majority of these moths were darker colored with a few white spots. So this is going to be a result of the moth's genetic coding, recognizing that these white moths just aren't surviving, in tandem with natural selection, obviously, Darwin's theories, which kind of more so prove evolution. And you can really see through the English peppered moth that evolution will occur when an organism feels the need to change. But the sad part is, in this instance, the organism only had to change because of humanity, and it's humanity's interference with it. So, why evolution occurs, again, just kind of addressed through humanity interference, but it also can occur as shown through the genome of the pygmy right whale, which is outlined very well in BMC Biology, and then a later article of BMC Cancer. So the genome of the pygmy right whale is very unique, as it's believed that many of the pygmy right whales, much of that species, um, came from the pygmy right whale. They adapted, obviously, and they changed into a different species, but they belong to the same family. And this pygmy right whale has a shockingly low number of cancer rates despite the large amount of cells. So humans have what we would consider a normal cancer rate, obviously, as that's us. But you'll see that humans get cancer occasionally, but these whales seemingly don't. And this is kind of outlined in Peto's paradox because there is no answer to this question, but how might a pygmy right whale, an organism 10 to 100 times the size of a human with 100 times the cells of a human, have astonishingly less cancer cells, cells that mutate and become cancerous? And that's kind of addressed through Peto's paradox, as there is no proof of this, but all one can believe is that evolution had to step in, evolution had to occur, as this pygmy right whale was able to foster a whole family of similar whales genetically, but all of these whales took the same trait of the Caparia marginata, where these whales would just have low numbers of cancer. So BMC biology outlines how scientists are currently trying to investigate and see why these whales have such low cancer rates and how might this be applied to humans. So these scientists are attempting to do good for humanity, attempting to do good for the world, because this could possibly be applied to other organisms. But how might this whale have such large numbers of cells and such little numbers of cancer? But that kind of gets into the debate of where might human interference need to draw the line, as these organisms still must be left alone, must be not interfered with enough, but still interfered with to a certain extent to benefit the rest of the world. So to keep moving on, the importance of genetic changes. So I really wanted to address here, leaning less away from the natural side of things, but more so just a broader spectrum. So you have to avoid the necessity of resilience simply through evolution. So if resilience is the capacity to adapt to stressful circumstances and to bounce back from adverse events, as demonstrated in the article, The Dark Side of Resilience, an organism will not have the need to adapt to stressful circumstances if they simply evolve. So this can be shown in many organisms, but again could even be brought back to the pygmy right whale. Why should this species have to be resilient to cancer? Why should the species have to produce more, and struggle with this cancer when they can simply go through natural selection, they can go through phenotypic plasticity, and they can go through evolution in order to adapt to these stressful circumstances, and instead of bouncing back, simply not have to face them in the future. So the pygmy right whale doesn't have to face cancer. Obviously, there's a few exceptions. Cancer can still develop in these animals, but why be resilient when you can change and not have to face the problem? So this could be applied to anything. So whether people, why should people feel the need to be resilient if they can simply change and not be forced to deal with such resilience? So that kind of leads, though, into my dark possibilities of evolution, where, yes, obviously, we've explained how change is good, how change can be beneficial to numerous organisms, such as the whales, such as the people, such as the English peppered moth, but there is some downsides to evolution if people step in or if nature, I guess, incorrectly chooses what lives and what dies. So this can be kind of explained through opportunistic species, as some organisms may be too willing to change. So, like we said, to avoid resilience, you simply must change, but sometimes a little bit of resilience is good because not all evolution is going to be necessary. So this is, again, could be outlined to the English peppered moth, as this moth obviously changed. It changed the number of darker colored moths and almost exterminated the light colored moth species. But in the downside, when the soot cleared up towards the end of the Industrial Revolution, as we started getting more eco-friendly and we started recognizing the adverse effects we were having on the atmosphere and the ecosystems around us, the sky began to clear up. And now these English peppered moths, which had evolved and they've changed their genetic coding through natural selection and phenotypic plasticity, they've changed to become a darker colored species. But this now darker colored species is going to face a lot of challenges because now the sky is back to being blue. So this bright sky highlights their dark colored, um, their dark color, just in general. So this opportunistic species, this moth, tried to take advantage by adapting instead of simply being resilient for, it was around a century, so obviously that's a long time for an organism, but by adapting and evolving, they kind of set themselves back as this organism would eventually go on to face a lot of struggles for the coming years as they had to simply go through what they did, but this time in reverse. So now the dark colored moths are getting picked off, and the white colored moths have to do exactly what the dark colored moths did a century prior. And this also kind of leads into natural selection as evolution gets to decide who struggles and who thrives. But sometimes some organisms don't deserve to struggle, and sometimes some organisms don't deserve to thrive. So if nature were left untouched, the darker colored English peppered moth shouldn't have deserved to thrive. But they did because of humanity's interference. So evolution really can be a double-edged sword, as it can both help a species raise themselves above from extinction, raise themselves above from endangerment, but it can also set them backwards, as these species will then have to possibly go through the same things that they just went through. So this leads into the types of inadvertent changes. So there's phenotypic changes that these species may experience, and these are often minor inconvenient changes, and they're a lot more isolated. So they're going to occur specifically in the adaptive alleles of only certain species. So this is shown through the velvet bean caterpillar / moth. Obviously, a caterpillar grows to become a moth, and this is outlined in the Brazilian Journal of Biology. So they did an experiment where they exposed this velvet bean caterpillar to it was an insecticide that was found to be particularly effective against the velvet bean caterpillar. And throughout 3 generations, with exposure to this pesticide, you could see slight changes that this organism would face. So the wings of the organism shrank. Somehow the insecticide affected the adaptive alleles inside, and it felt that my offspring are going to need genetic changes, which again is going to be more so like an unconscious thing, like that organism can't consciously make the decision, but the body itself decided to change. And then you have genotypic traits. So these changes are a little bit more major, and they often are through like an extreme need. So the insecticide was causing a minor inconvenience to the velvet bean caterpillar, and the Brazilian Journal of Biology really explained how the caterpillars themselves were still able to live and go through their natural lifespan, but they would just experience like slight changes inside the body and inside the genetics of only that specific offspring. But in genotype changes, it's more so a larger population, and you'll see that the actual genetics of the organism will change because there's an extreme need for change. So if the Brazilian Journal of Biology, instead of just taking a few velvet bean caterpillars and their eventual moths and taking those offsprings, if they expose this insecticide to the whole population of velvet bean caterpillars, you may see genotype changes, as the species itself is going to feel a need to change and a need to survive. So a lot of it's coming down to insecticides or human-based interference with the cancerous, the resistance to cancer found in the genome of the pygmy right whale, and even the pollution caused by people in the English peppered moth. All of those you'll see could possibly be genotype changes, started as phenotype, but could eventually spread throughout the whole species and change the eventual genome of the population. So this kind of moves into my solution to the problem. So people are interfering with organisms. People are changing the genetics. They're causing organisms to experience phenotypic plasticity. They're causing organisms to undergo evolution. There's really no solution to it, because all you can do is attempt to prevent it. So you can attempt to prevent pollution, such as air pollution, which obviously we've had organizations such as the UN step in and try and reduce the amount of smog and soot that we're putting up into the atmosphere. But at the end of the day, all you can ask of people is to study and learn and look at these adaptive alleles of these organisms and look at the genotype of these organisms, especially the pygmy right whale, which possibly holds the key to preventing cancer. But all you can ask is that intervention stay limited and more so stay with a respectful line of research and not cross the line of interference with the species itself. So that's my presentation, and here are my resources, and I want to say thank you. Have a good day.